cues are really two-way. It's not just the cues that you're picking up on from another leader, another group. It's the cues that you're giving out. So
Welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with Michele, Sergio, and Kristi. I love the fact that we can just come in the room together virtually, and it's like, let's hang out for a minute and chat about some stuff going on in your world and other stuff. So this quote that we're going to start off with, Kristi, it came from you because you watched or listened to and watched a 3-hour podcast. So I commend you for that. And I'm going to step in and do the same probably. Vanessa Van Edwards. So the quote that we're going to start off with is, when you uncover the cues being sent to you, everything becomes clearer. So Kristi, I'd love to kick it over to you and start off. Oh, let me back up a minute, people. In case you don't know who Kristi and Sergio is, I know. So Sergio is service line executive over medical and let me not run through my words. You ready? Service line executive, medical and surgical specialties, Sutter Health, Sutter Medical Foundation, more importantly, right?
correct.
Okay, I got it. And Kristi is senior director, operations integration. That's what your LinkedIn says, and if it's wrong, then that's on you.
Got it. I'm up to date.
With Sutter Health. The three of us work together at Sutter Health. And I love the fact that just love the fact that even though I'm not at Sutter Health anymore, you're still my family.
Still
So,
connected.
Likewise.
yes,
Yeah.
I love it. So anyway, Kristi, with the quote, Vanessa Van Edwards, what stood out with you or about cues in general as to why we're chatting about this, especially with where we are today?
I think what stands out the most about cues is in watching that podcast, it was more about how you can change or adapt your cues to the situation that you were in. But I kind of thought through that in terms of, as a leader, picking up on the cues that we are being given by the people around us is so important. And I know that you and Sergio and Vaughn were talking about change. And we were saying, as we jumped on the podcast, with the rapid pace of change, it's really important to be able to pick up on those cues. You need to know when people are disengaging or even frightened at what they're being faced with. And so listening to that podcast and hearing those cues and what Vanessa Van Edwards had to say was pretty interesting, and
Yeah.
a lot that you could bring forward with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was interesting just to level set people on cues, and you can do it. It's that whatever they're projecting and giving off to what's going on. I think about disc communication styles, to where do you have someone who literally, like me, I'm a bullet point person. So if you give me paragraph narrative on something, on instructions, I'm literally going to have an out of body experience. I mean, so those cues are important to pick up on, especially if you're looking at your team and you're delivering change messages. By the way, to your point, it's rapid fire these days. I mean, as organizations look at all the challenges that are ahead for 2025, the challenges that we've had already, the challenges we're anticipating for 2025, and making adjustments to those things, it's important to see, are we losing people? Are they stressing out? Yeah. Sergio, what do you think? What's on your mind?
Yeah, cues to me are those early signals that really are intended to help give you bits of information around how someone is reacting, but not reacting to something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that bit of kind of emotional intelligence, body language that
Mm-hmm.
is that's saying something without saying something really. And it's kind of the obligation of the leader to pick up on those cues when they're being delivered or when they're being shared, and react accordingly, whether it's someone's body language turns negative, or they frown, or they for example, cross their arms. There's any number. I mean, we all know what these cues are,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really, how do we pick up on them and what do we do with them,
Mm-hmm.
given the message and the context of the communication that we're having with that person. So it's really using the cues, like what's being given to that leader, to help uh, do something with it, to help act on it and make it meaningful, and either enact the change or change the messaging, or
Mm-hmm.
or use it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, what I found, I was having a discussion with a leader this morning, a coaching session, because what happens is there are people that will deliver those messages, right? Critical messages, and they're here in their head.
Mhm.
And they're not paying attention to the room and scanning to see how things are landing. So it's like, put yourself in a position and have the intention that I'm not going to be in my head. I'm going to literally step in, and I want to make sure that the room is being scanned, because this isn't about me. This is about them, the people in the room. And whatever it takes to set yourself up, because it can be nerve-wracking as a leader to deliver information, messaging that is not, hi, everyone gets 100% bonus this year. No. And it's awkward, uncomfortable, and we have to practice and prepare for it.
It cues, and I think I'll go back to when Michelle was coaching me way back in our early days. And simple as, and this is still something I struggle with, simple as the head nod,
Hmm.
and using it appropriately.
Hmm.
So using the head nod when you're in agreement, Michelle just head nodded because she knows what I'm talking about, so she's in
Yeah.
agreement with me. But being really careful about not doing the head nod in a situation where you may not agree with what the person is saying, because the perception is, I just watched you nod your head,
Hmm.
so you're in agreement with what I'm saying. I'm leaving here and I'm going to go do something that you actually don't agree with. So something as simple as a cue, as a head nod.
It's so funny you say that. Rocco was a head nodder. And we would be in the room together, and she would be like this, and I said, and she didn't even realize it.
Yep.
And it's like, you're agreeing? She goes, no, 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 I'm just following along. Okay. I mean, that's not the message, right? And you're absolutely right. And so it's like, it's observing other people, but it's also being aware of what cues are we dropping,
Mhm.
as we're moving along. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Sergio, what have you seen? Because it is emotional intelligence. How do
Mhm.
you adapt to it? What have you seen in your own journey about what tips and tricks maybe that you've done so that you can be more cognizant of them?
Yeah. I think there's been a couple of examples where leaders have done a good job of picking up on cues and then adapting their style, their communication, the message to react. And I'm sure you and Kristi have seen this many times in your previous lives, but when various messages or communications are provided to a group of leaders, a group of physicians, and uh, kind of the most dangerous cue presents itself, which is, do you have any questions or what feedback do you have? And the room goes absolutely silent.
Yeah.
And really leaders who are adept in that situation are able to pick up on, okay, no questions is the red flag. What
Mm-hmm.
what was missed in that scenario? So there's kind of that cohort of leaders and
Mm-hmm.
how they respond and react to it. And I think there's another cohort where the cues are not being picked up on, and there's maybe an assumption after the conversation or the communication that it was, everything's hunky dory and everything was well received. And so that's a failure to pick up on a really critical cue around making sure the message landed, that there's absolute clarity. And that's similar to what Kristi said about that head nod when it's not necessarily agreement. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that creates a risk. It creates a risk for everyone in the room and for the leaders. So, um, where I've seen this work very well is where those leaders are able to really pick up on when those negative cues present themselves
Mm-hmm.
early, and to either adapt their communication style or the message, or some form of the two.
Yeah. What do you do? Either one of you, what do you do in the situation where the room goes silent? There is no feedback. There are no questions. Because clearly you've communicate everything that they need to hear. And you've done such a great job that there's nothing. What do you do in those situations?
For me, sometimes I ask for the room to repeat back what it is they think they heard me say. Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just even doing a small exercise like that, what I said what they heard and what comes back out are very different. That gives me
Uh-huh.
the opportunity then to continue to ask more questions and people start to engage in the conversation. Because again,
Mhm.
sometimes how you say something or how you present it and what someone's hearing is totally different.
Mhm.
That also goes back then, what were my cues, even vocal tone that I was using at the time. So a cue is also your vocal tone. And did it people just shut off because maybe my tone was a little snappy or harsh, and
Mhm.
they went, this is not a conversation to engage in, this is to listen and shut up. That's what to do. Now I
This
need
is a mandate and
this
directive.
is the
We've got no
mandate
voice
directive.
in this.
Right. So sometimes just, asking people to repeat back or even saying something a different way.
Mhm.
If people aren't speaking up, something didn't land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Sergio, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I try to always bring it back to either two or three very straightforward bullets, like the key takeaways, and try to make sure that the message that you want to deliver really isn't lost.
Yeah.
And giving, that crucial pause, that awkward but so necessary, 7 to 8 seconds, and then really asking the room once again for a confirmation around their understanding and what questions do they have, and
Yeah.
really stressing kind of the open-ended nature of that, to really, you're kind of you're trying to establish
Mhm.
safety if you haven't at that point, to invite the questions, to get the clarity, to make sure you have some alignment. So I found that helps, but I also like Kristi's around, around putting it back on the audience to make sure that they understood and they can repeat
Mhm.
back.
Yeah. I'm going to say yes, and the thing that I would add that comes to mind for me is when you know your audience, right? When you go in to deliver change messages or whatever the messaging may be, is to put yourself in their shoes and think, okay, I'm hearing this stuff from me. What concerns do I have? What questions do I have? Everything else. And so you can have those in your back pocket if the room goes silent. And then ask people, if I was in your shoes, this is kind of a concern I would have, or this is a question that I would think would come up. What do you think?
Mhm.
And I think that way too, along with everything that you both have said, we're inviting people into the discussion to let them know, hey, we're anticipating that you're not going to love this, right? And these are some things that typically surface. Yeah, almost like a verbal FAQ, if you will.
Mhm.
And I will say, even in conversations, when conversations do get started, it's really important to allow people to have the space to say what they need to say. So often, especially, I guess, over Zoom, I was going to say, but this happens when you're in person too. People want to be heard and will start to talk over people. And it's really important as leaders that we listen. There's a lot of myths that are being said throughout, the conversation. And I very often will find myself playing, hey, Michelle's trying to say something here. Let's give her the floor to speak up, to try to, at least give a level playing field to everybody. Because I
Mhm.
think that these day and age, when everything's moving so fast, everybody feels like they have to get their point out. And we're not picking up on the cues from the rest of the team that really has
Mhm.
something important to say.
Yeah, it's an important role, I think, as a leader, facilitator, whatever role you may step into. And because we have people that don't realize, I get excited. I did it before we hit record, and I'm like, oh my God, let me just steal your story, Kristi, as I'm running off on this other thing. And so, but it is to your point, is that if people aren't heard, they're going to repeat themselves and they're going to get louder and louder and louder. So we have to make sure we give them a space to actually feel heard. Yeah.
Or shut down.
Yeah.
How many quotes do you see very often where you need to be worried about your people that normally do speak up and normally do engage, when they aren't engaged and they shut down?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
silence is a powerful cue, very powerful. And it particularly from those who, like you mentioned, Kristi, who tend to share feedback or tend to share their perspective, but don't. That right there is a very strong nonverbal cue that is a signal, um, something could be wrong.
What do you do in this situation? Let's say that there's a meeting scenario and you've got your people that are typically engaged and verbal and everything else, and they literally just shut down. What do you do?
For me, it depends on the person.
Mhm.
If I'm really intimately involved with that person, we've worked together a lot, I know I can call on them. So if I can calm the room and say, Sergio, what do you think? I'll
Mhm.
call them out in that situation. If it's somebody that I don't know, I'll often follow back with them after,
Mhm.
because calling somebody out may put them in a complete state of panic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And context matters. And so there may be, there likely, I should say, is a very valid reason why they're remaining silent. And there may be an opportunity that they wish to speak, but don't feel either empowered or feel it's not appropriate,
Mhm.
or they're simply not comfortable. So it's really reading the room and understanding, is it the right time to give that leader the platform? Of course, you want to, but as
Mhm.
you mentioned, you don't want to create an uncomfortable situation where you're calling out a leader, and you're doing so from the perspective of from being, you think you're trying to do a good thing, but you
Mhm.
can actually be doing a disservice to that leader by putting them on the spot.
Yeah, it's interesting what comes to mind for me. There was someone recently I was in the room with, and um, it was a change thing. She knew from, how you round with people beforehand, the meeting before the meeting. Japanese refer to it nemawashi, as in lean management system. It's the meeting before the meeting. And it's a very strategic approach to do things, especially when you are anticipating there's some people that may not, may have questions, may sidetrack, derail, whatever things. But what she's talking about is that there was this one, I'll refer to him toxic. She didn't refer to him toxic, member of this team, that literally felt that she could speak for everyone. And so this thing came up, and she literally said, no, none of us want this. And she knew, the leader knew there were other people that actually wanted it, but now you created this space that's not safe for anyone, right, in this smaller team to step in. And so in that situation, she allowed it to play out the way it did. My recommendation at further would be to stay in the moment, because it wasn't a room of 100 people. It was, more like 6 or 8. I appreciate that you feel that you can speak for the group, but why don't we hear from other people, right? But even rounding back with other people individually offline, because in that moment, that one particular person had created this awkwardness among the team, to where people didn't feel comfortable stepping in. So to everything that you're saying, it's be aware, and there's not one way to approach stuff,
Mhm.
and understand what you're looking at, because the ultimate goal is to get to the bottom of it and hear concerns, resistance, what people maybe are excited about. You could have most of the room that's like, this sucks, this is the worst thing ever, and then you got a couple of people go, I'm really excited about this, but I'm not going to say anything in this group.
I don't want to be that person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God, we're gonna do something
Right.
new. And you're going, I'm not gonna tell anybody that I'm really happy about this.
Well, and I think it's important to pull aside the person who spoke on behalf of the entire group, because they're clearly overcompensating for something. And so it's really important to understand what it is that they are scared of. When you
Hmm.
say everyone feels this way, there's safety in numbers. So I'm bringing
Hmm.
people along with me.
Hmm.
Clearly, that person is afraid of something. And
Hmm.
probably will not say it in front of that group. So pulling the person aside later and say, let's talk about your comment today, and
Hmm.
let me help me understand what you're
Hmm.
frightened about is, what's frightening you about
Yeah.
the work.
Yeah. Or just, even if you don't want to go to the what's frightening you, because some people will get defensive, right?
Yeah.
Because we've already labeled what that is. Help me understand where that's coming from.
Mhm.
Right? Where's this statement, this need to boldly make this statement on behalf of the group? Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, completely agree. Um, thank you for this. Kristi, thank you for listening to a 3-hour podcast so that we we could we could actually have this topic.
I would tell you that it's really interesting to go listen to it. It will make you think about how you even sit, even the distance between your ear and your shoulder, and being able to keep yourself aligned shows that you're open. Yes. And
Okay,
if
I'm going to be overthinking the world if I end up listening to this. There was another one that you said. What was the one about more trustworthy?
The
Talk with
more
your
you
hands.
trust your hands, talking with your hands. It
So if you don't talk with your hands, start moving those puppies around.
Start moving those. And she said an easy way to start that is if you are in a situation where you're one-on-one with somebody and there's a desk or a table in front of you, always place your arms, hands on top of the desk or the table so people can see your hands, because hidden hands makes people wonder what you're doing underneath that table,
Yeah.
or, and that is another lack of trust type of a signal.
Interesting. So put your hands on top of the table. Don't hide them. Was there anything else that stood out?
I really watched the part about when to go in for a hug, and
Oh,
when to
interesting.
shake, and when to shake. And she said, if you're somebody that is not a hugger, immediately upon saying, "Hi, my name is Kristi," extend your arm at that point, and you're right then saying, and if somebody says, "I'm a hugger," you say, "That's great." And keep your hand extended, because that still might not be your safe space.
Yeah.
And they even went into how some of our politicians shake and what the meaning behind that is. Very interesting.
You can't, there's no way you can look at stuff the same way anymore.
No, not
I
at
will
all.
critique everything from this point on about how people hold their eyes, their mouth.
Yeah, she's judging us right now.
I know.
And you know that's happening. She's
Be
going,
careful of your
yeah, I didn't know that
pocket
about you,
handshakes.
Michele. Now I know. Now I know. Because I'm a hugger. And it was so funny. Christopher Henry, who's now at Bath and Body Works, but he was a VP of talent management at Sutter. Did you know Christopher, Sergio?
Yes.
Yeah. So when he first came to the organization, I saw him in the hallway, and for whatever reason, we just hugged. Like, oh my God, Christopher, I just met the man. It was like, but it was just one of those things. And then I do have other people, and there were people on my team that you didn't hug. And this is before COVID, right? After COVID, they're different. But it's interesting that they will just step back. And so you do have to pay attention to that stuff because it's awkward for people and it's uncomfortable. And I don't want to make people uncomfortable. So
It can
yeah.
be very off-putting for some.
Yeah.
Kind of close contact. And she talks about the distance, where you keep people at distances, and the reasoning behind that. And there's reasoning, very good reason of why there are distances and how it makes people feel.
Okay. Wow.
Fascinating.
So we'll put the link to that podcast in this podcast description. So Kristi, I'll go look for it. And then people can be as educated and like critical as Kristi's going to be now. Then I'm like, oh my gosh.
Be careful of your handshakes and hugs with Kristi.
Yes. And the distance between your shoulders and
Right.
how you use your hands, and don't put them under the table.
Oh, there's a lot more. Just wait.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I appreciate the time in the room with you two, and hopefully tips and tricks that people can walk away with and learn from. So I'm curious, what 1 or 2 things you want people to walk away with around this topic? And we'll start with Sergio.
Yeah, I would say just be mindful around how cues really tie into your emotion, really your EQ and your emotional intelligence, and how cues are really two-way. It's not just the cues that you're picking up on from another leader, another group, it's the cues that you're giving out. So we tend to think it's kind of one directional, but really it's there and back. And being mindful about that, because it has a lot of implications for communication, for behavioral for so many aspects of how we interact with people.
Yeah, it's interesting when you said that. I went to pay attention to how people are responding to what you're doing, and then you can ask yourself, what vibe am I giving off right now? What cue am I giving off that is not aligning, especially if the reaction is not aligning to what you would expect to get based on what just happened. Yeah. Thank you. Kristi, how about you?
I would say ask for feedback, but do it ahead. So if you know you're struggling with your own cues, um, you've heard before, people have told you, especially if you're somebody who comes off very strong, um, ask somebody in the room that you know will be honest with you to say, will you watch me today and give me feedback on how I show up after the meeting? And getting that immediate feedback on your cues, how that person thought you interacted with the group will help you moving forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. Way back when, and it might still show up, people just don't say it as much anymore. It was like, Michele, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And so there was this disconnect, right, in cues, if you will. I didn't have that term or that language before, but a lot of it had to do with my underlying narrative that I had going, right? So I openly admit to people that I'm a recovering perfectionist. So that drives a lot of stuff, right? And so there's a certain level of energy that would show up with when I was solidly a perfectionist. And so it's that kind of stuff too. So you can pay attention to how things are landing, but you can also pay attention to how it feels in your own body when you're going through and doing stuff, because that's going to be a real strong indicator whether or not you're comfortable and approachable, or you're just demanding on task and here we go, and there's no leeway for anything but just perfect or my way, right? So
Yeah.
So thank you, both of you. I look forward to more. The next time I would love to get Sergio, Kristi, and Vaughn in the room, and that will
Yes.
be a fun conversation. Thank you again. Until next time, this has been Leadership Soundbites with Sergio and Kristi, and have an awesome day. Thank you.